The Hog That Dare Not Hunt by Day by Scott Odell, Chapter 31. We spent long hours getting the ship ready to sail. By nightfall, all I wanted to do was eat and fall into my bunk. But for 3 nights I went around in Deptford trying to find out something about Henry Phillips. Everyone knew Belsey, and everyone deduced from what they knew about him that a friend of his could not amount to much. But they would say no more, nor did they try to invent more, Deptford people being a closed-mouthed group. On Friday, we took the ship to St. Catherine's Dock, as promised, and there met my 2 partners. Phillips had been joking about the lead, of course, and the cargo of wool they were counting on had not arrived, and did not arrive for 3 more days. This gave me a chance to do more inquiring about Phillips. But, as at Deptford, my efforts failed, and I was on the point of giving it up when it occurred to me that there was one man living in London whom I had overlooked. A man with a large acquaintance in a city of gossip, rumor, and varieties of truth. This thought came to me on Sunday night. Early the next morning, I was in Mr. Carswell's office. I was there before he arrived. An hour before, waiting for him. He was flushed in the face and not too happy looking when he came, and kept me waiting for another hour before he called me into his office. "I hope you're not bringing in another one," he grumbled. "We'll fold to the garret. Have to put him up in the old pest house, which is not being used now. Not luxurious, but..." "I'm here," I said, "to find out if you're acquainted with a man by the name of Phillips." Phillips? Who isn't acquainted with someone with that name? A very common name in London, you know. Henry Phillips. Ah, that's different. Henry Phillips? That name has distinct possibilities. Mr. Carswell called out to the old woman in charge of the brass-bound ledger and asked her to bring it forth. He spread the ledger out on his desk and thumbed through the pages until he came to the names beginning with the letter P. At this point he paused, read for several minutes, placed a ribbon marker on the page, closed the ledger, and looked up. Mr. Carswell had not changed. He was a blunt man, and he was blunt now. "Henry Phillips, Esquire, has been one of my respected guests here at Clink," he said. "Not once, but twice. There's a possibility that he might honor me even with a 3rd visit." He opened the ledger again and gave me an appraising look. "What's your connection with Mr. Phillips?" There was nothing to be gained by being evasive with Samuel Carswell. "He is a partner in a business we own called the New World Exploration and Trading Company," I said. "He's a partner, or he owns a share in the company? There's a difference, you know, legally speaking." "He's a shareholder." "A large one?" "He owns about 1/4 of the shares." "Has he paid for them?" "Yes." "In paper?" "In gold." Mr. Carswell made a questioning murmur in his throat. "Your company has an important-sounding name. Do your operations coincide with the name?" "We're just starting. We have a cargo now ready for the lowlands. We'll be trading regularly there and with Spain and Portugal, likely with the Indies." "What of the exploration that you mention?" "We plan to explore, too, once we get started. In the New World, there, and in other places." Mr. Carswell pondered. "Just how important is it for you to know the truth as I have it here?" He lifted the heavy ledger, held it up to my gaze, and set it down. "Are you just curious about Henry Phillips, or are you in earnest? In other words, are you interested in knowing about him financially, his morals, his religion? Everything you can tell me about him is important." "How important?" Mr. Carswell asked without a pause. "Enough to settle a share of your company upon me?" "I have gold." "Ah, a share," repeated Mr. Carswell. "I wouldn't refuse a little gold either, but trading and exploration is a growing business. A ship, as you know, has already gone around the world. Where ships go, trade follows. I would rather share the future with you than the present. A share in your next venture, is it?" "A share." "How many?" 5. "Say 7, and I'll give you all the information on Henry Phillips you'll ever have use for." At that moment, I would have given everything I owned to know what was written in the brass-bound ledger that lay in front of me. Mr. Carswell excused himself and repaired to an alcove where I heard the gurgle of something flowing from a jug. He came back briskly, opened the ledger, and began to talk rather than read from the notes he had taken upon the occasions that Henry Phillips had been in Clink. "First off," said Mr. Carswell, "as you'd perhaps guess, Henry Phillips is well born. He's the son of Richard Phillips, a man of note in the counties of Dorset and Somerset, who was thrice a member of Parliament and twice High Sheriff. He owns, besides, rich lands in many places." "How did his son ever get in Clink?" I asked, "which, if my memory serves me right, is reserved for the middling poor." "There are ways and ways to matriculate," said Mr. Carswell, and Henry chose one of many. Whether he was intended for the ministry is not clear, but he did have high ecclesiastical patrons, for 2 of them came here to persuade me to release him. However, he seemed to favor a literary career and spoke of it often to me. Here Mr. Carswell retired again to the alcove and returned shortly, a little redder in the face, to resume his narrative. "There are 2 convergent stories at this point," he said, "and I cannot vouch for either. But let me elucidate further, and you can be the judge. One story is that in dire financial straits, he deliberately robbed his father of a large sum of money and fell at once into disgrace. This is a story told and repeated and sworn to by his enemies. There is another story, however, a kinder version told by his friends, which I am at times inclined to believe. From this story, it appears that his father entrusted him with a large sum of money to pay some person or the other here in London. But upon reaching the city, the son allowed himself to be tempted into a card game, and in a single night he gambled away the whole amount that his father had placed in his care." "Both stories could be true," I said. "Yes, he could have stolen the money from his father and gambled it away." "You spoke of Henry Phillips's joining the ministry of the church," I said. "He's not a Lutheran, then?" "God bless us, no," exclaimed Mr. Carswell. "I presumed not, for he speaks ill of Martin Luther and of Tyndale, too. Equally, he's against heretics. He's against Lutheranism. If he had the power, he'd see that both Tyndale and Luther were hanged from the highest tree on Tower Hill." I'd gathered this from what he said to me. "Curiously enough," Mr. Carswell said, "he's strong, too, against the king. I advised him, while he was my guest here at Clink, to restrain himself, or one day he'd find himself walking around without a head. He had money when he signed the contract with me, a bag full of it. That might account for his arrogance. His finances ebb and flow like the tide. It would be wise for him to take a more middle course." Carswell had gone through his ledger, and I think the judge of spirits as well. In any event, he said he would have a proper contract drawn up and that we would gather and sign it on the morrow, God willing. "I wish Henry Phillips were not a partner in our next venture," he said as we parted. "But maybe we can change his ways. He's not a bad sort, just a man of extremes." I picked up my hat and made a stiff bow. I said nothing more, having already made up my mind about Henry Williams. End of chapter 31.